If you're regularly adding custom fields to your actions, anything other than the first name, last name, email, and zip code that we always ask for, then you may want to create them as a question. Questions are pre-built snippets of HTML to make custom fields. When you create an action and want to add custom fields, you can just drag it into your action form rather than having to make it from scratch each time. Questions are only available on actions that you create for your group, not when you're working on actions with your individual account. To start creating questions, click on Questions in the Start Organizing menu. Select which group you're working with from the drop-down menu, and then click on the blue Add New Question button. You'll choose what type of question you want to create. Your options are a text field, text area, checkboxes, radio buttons, and a drop-down menu. A text field is good for when the information your activist provides will be just one line, like if you're asking someone to provide their phone number. Text areas, though, are for larger inputs, like if you're asking someone to share their story. Both of these question types get created the same way. So let's create a text field or a text area from the drop-down menu. The first field that you need to fill in is the administrative title. This is how the question is going to be identified internally in your list of questions. The name field is what your data will be stored under as a custom field. This is like a column heading. And then you'll add a label and/or a placeholder for your field. The label will appear outside the field, while the placeholder text appears in gray inside the field itself. When we ask for our standard first and last name, email address, and zip code, each of those are made as text fields with no label, only placeholder text. Let's create our fields the same way if you want to match the other fields. Labels are great for adding more context to a question, like labeling the field address and then putting in placeholder text as 123 Main Street to provide a model for the format you want. You can provide only a label or a placeholder, or both, but you'll want to do at least one. Otherwise, your field will just appear as a blank box and your activist won't know what information you want there. Let's create that address field. To add new questions, just hit the Add New Question box again. Checkbox groups allow an activist to select multiple options, and these are good for collecting attribute information like I'm a parent or I'm interested in volunteering. To create checkboxes, select that from the menu. Add an administrative title for what these checkboxes will be called in your list of questions, and if you'd like, give your group a label, which will appear above the list of checkboxes. Then, add as many checkbox options as you'd like. Use this green button to add additional boxes. Each option needs a label, which will appear alongside the checkbox, and each needs a name, which will be the name of the custom field where the data is stored. For instance, we can make checkboxes for Do you want to volunteer? Our options will be yes and no. And the option names will be volunteer yes and volunteer no. You'll need to make these names clearly related to the question that you're asking, since each will be stored as its own custom field, since people can choose more than one checkbox. Then we'll click to Create Question, and now it's in your list of questions. Now we're going to look at creating radio buttons and drop-down menus. These work the same way. Radio buttons only allow an activist to select one option. These are good for multiple choice answers, like selecting an age group or an affiliation. To create radio buttons, select the question type from the menu. Give your radio button group an administrative title and a name for what the custom field will be called. If you'd like, give it a label that will appear at the top of your group of options. and then create as many buttons as you'd like, using the green button to add additional options. Give each option a label, how it will be identified on your form, and a value for how it will be identified on your back end. This time, let's ask what sessions someone wants to attend at a conference. So we'll give them the options of training A, training B, and training C. We'll call this radio button group session selection, and that's what we'll call it on the back end as well. When you've created all your options, click the blue Create Question button. Lastly, we'll make a drop-down menu. A drop-down menu is displayed as a menu of multiple choices, and like radio buttons, allow an activist to select just one option. These are great for when you have a lot of options. It condenses them under one rectangular box, rather than having a long list of options taking up space on your form. This works well for having activists tell you their affiliation or things like what school district they live in. This works similarly to how we just did radio buttons. We'll select drop-down from the menu and give it an administrative title and a name. If you'd like, create a label that will appear next to the menu to identify what you're asking. Then we'll give each option a label. On the drop-down menu, option values aren't required, so you can create a dummy option, like having the first option in your list say Select 1. Any option that you create without a value won't have any data stored in your database. So we'll make Select 1 our first option, and then actual options will follow. We'll give all of our actual options a label so that the data can be accessed later. When we're done, we're going to hit Create Question. Once you've created questions, these will show up as pre-built questions anytime you go to add a custom form field to an action you're creating. Remember how I said at the beginning of this tutorial that questions are only available to groups, not just on individual accounts? So let's talk more about that for a minute. For groups that are not part of a network, every administrator can create and edit these questions, as well as add new custom fields and create ad hoc questions when making an action. Essentially, there are no limits or permissions. For groups that are part of a network, however, things may work differently. Network administrators have the option to lock these questions down. They can create questions at the parent level and then send them down to all the other groups in the network and set the permissions so that only network administrators or admins of the parent group are able to create questions. In this case, subgroups aren't able to create their own questions when adding fields to a form, only select from the pre-built questions their network contains. If this applies to you, you also won't be able to edit the questions, for instance, to add other options. This locking down of permissions also prevents child groups from adding custom form HTML to their actions. And when you upload new activists or edit an additional record, you'll only be able to access pre-built custom field columns rather than creating or editing your own. If the network has chosen not to lock these options, you'll have the full range of permissions to create and edit questions, add new custom fields, and edit responses through uploads or on individual records. Network administrators can change these permissions, so if you're missing access to create or edit questions, ask your network administrator or get in touch with us. If you have any further questions about the Questions tool or any of our other Action Network features, please go to help.actionnetwork.org.